and had several other people in the hospital too. But so we've been all over the place the last couple of days. Today is the first Sunday of Advent, which means it's the first Sunday of the church calendar. So this is like January the 1 in the church. Okay, if you want to go by whatever calendar you want to go by as a Christians, this is kind of the one we do for our church storytelling. And this is year B. It's A, B, and C. A is Matthew, so B would be Mark. Great, thank you. Thanks for playing. And obviously C would be Rogue. So what about John? Well, John gets interspersed. John is such a different critter than the other three. The way he tells the story, so he gets interspersed through all 3 years, mainly or a lot during Easter. Okay, so there's that. So one year I think I might just break off, if I could, mentally, and just do John. Just do John. I know, maybe, I don't know. I know. I'm so programmed. Yeah, I know. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know. But this is the one. This is y'all have heard me tell this story. This is Ed. This was I was a divinity student at Duke. I'd been raised in the Assemblies of God, which you hear a lot about apocalyptic literature, and it's really scary because you think the world's coming to the end any second, and you're not going to get to go. Okay, it's going to be. So you live your life in this constant fear that God's going to show up and kind of knock you on the head. And well, there's a lot of other grace in there too, though. So I mean, so I just become a Presbyterian at Duke. There are not many of you who are Presbyterian, so you get to go and preach a lot as a student out through all the community. They churches need fill-in pastors or preachers, and so they want to give divinity students a chance to suffer through or whatever, or suffer through a seminary student's sermon. And so it came to this Sunday was rolling around, and I knew that I was going to preach someplace, and so I started asking my friends, "What are y'all going to say about this passage?" And they were like, "Oh, we're doing the Old Testament passage that day. We're not doing that one." Because this is what is called the little apocalypse, meaning the big apocalypse is Revelation. And this little section, Mark chapter 13, verses 24 through 37, is called a little apocalypse because it out of nowhere, this is, again, keep in context, the last week of Jesus' life here. From chapter 11 through chapter 16 is the last week of Jesus' life. So a third of this book is taken up with the last week of Jesus' life. So that's a big deal. But out of nowhere, Jesus is going along, and then he just inserts this story about, here's, how are we going to know? And then boom, this all comes flooding out, and Peter, James, and John and Andrew gets to join the crew this time, and they're hearing this, and you can imagine they're like, "What? We just wanted to know about this building. We didn't want to know all that. This is dark and scary," or at least that's the way we tend to hear it in our age. And so, but this is always the first Sunday of Advent every year. Mark does it, Matthew does it, Luke does it. Every year, this passage, or their version of it. Always the first Sunday of Advent. And so, juxtaposed to our culture, which, you go to the mall, if you go to the mall, and what do you hear? This jingle bells and, really Christmassy stuff. Bing Crosby, or... No, it is not. No, it's just kind of this really happy, upbeat thing, and yet you come in here, this place where we say, this is the message, this is the Christian faith, this is the hope. And the first Sunday of Advent, you don't get Frosty the Snowman here. You get, whoa, wars and rumors of war. And it's like, what the heck? How did that happen? And yeah. Well, isn't that the way that the last, what have we had the last 3 weeks, though, building up minus, well, even Christ the King Sunday, it's keep an eye out, keep watching, keep looking, better, stay aware, watch for Jesus somewhere, and then here we continue that on. And so the image we're supposed to get, because this is preparing our hearts for the coming of the Christ at Christmas, first part. But it's also preparing our hearts for the coming in fullness as well. So we always, this time of year we focus on the first one, but there's this fullness that's coming and we don't know when that is, and we're supposed to keep our eye on that. So we start this week with how many? 1. There you go. So it's dark, and then it's supposed to. The image is as we get closer and closer to Christmas, it gets brighter. All right, keep all those things going, juggling in your head, and that's all we ask of you from the pulpit is keep this in mind, keep the passage in mind, keep everything in mind, and that's all. That's all you have to do. Okay? Yeah. Come on, I'm not asking much here. But here we go. This is based on Daniel. And this is actually after I ran in and finished that story, when I ran into everybody who kept dodging this passage. I just said, and they were pressing me for a thesis. I said, this is what I'm going to write on. Apocalyptic literature and the modern Reformed tradition. And we're going to use this passage. And they were like, really? And I said, sure, why not? And here we go. This is Jesus speaking, verse 24. But in those days, anytime you hear that as in text, those days or that day, you know that they're wanting to get your attention, okay? But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heaven. And see, elect, man, Presbyterians love that. From the fig tree, learn its lesson, and soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know the summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you will know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be aware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. Okay, familiar? Yeah, somewhat. Yeah. We know the keep awake part. Okay, what'd you hear new? Jumped out at you? Summed up the parables how? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. The talents. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be ready. Be ready. Be awake. Every minister's dream for it's come time for the sermon. You know, be awake, y'all. Maybe that's the way we got to start. Keep awake. It's just, I mean, that's just right. Keep awake. So there, yeah, that notion. So anybody else, that it is kind of a culmination of those other parables that, and in keeping in context, all of those that we heard over the last few weeks in the last week of Jesus' life. Yeah. We're getting ready. Oh yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we're getting. Oh, I can't wait for that one. That's good to see. Okay, so there's that. Yes, get ready, get ready. Anybody else here, or how did you hear that? Or did you hear anything? Yes. Uh-huh. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say, I mean, why is it? They didn't consult me on that part, but if they would have, I'd have said, I wouldn't have said it like that. But it is, it is such a, this is such a great conversation point, which everybody has to, hold your breath. And when we go into this, couple things. And it depends on if you take it as he is talking about that generation that he's speaking to. Now, is that the one Jesus was speaking to? Was it the one that Mark was speaking to 35 years later, some odd years later? Or there's a modern version that was like that we wouldn't adhere to as the Reformed tradition. I'll get that in a second. But that would say this generation of the last generation when it all starts coming down. And some would have said, well, when there's that the fig tree being restored here, that was when Israel was reinstated as a country in 1948. And so you'd have 40 years. Well, that would be 1988. Well, that wasn't right either. So you can take it in certain ways. Was Jesus talking literally this generation, the one he was in? And if that's the case, he was wrong, because that didn't happen. That's a possibility. I mean, when you're taking in interpretations and you have to take in all possibilities, and you go, okay, that was wrong. That's an option. Yeah, that's right. Or it was the next generation. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. It could be. I mean, yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Mm. Right. That could be. Yeah. Well, that ultimately, that is when we talk about end times in Scripture and the early church, when they were talking about end times, they meant everything beyond the cross, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now we're in the end times, because Peter, when he stood up on Pentecost and said, in the last days, the Spirit will be poured out, and he was like, we are now in the last days. So we've been in the last days for a long time, Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And ultimately, that is what apocalyptic literature is supposed to do. It's supposed to give us this hope that there's this revelation and you get to look into it. Your world may be falling apart like their world was falling apart. In their eyes, they felt. But yet you have to understand there's this bigger picture going on in the, up here, that God is in control of these things. And that is supposed to give them because they didn't have control of their world in any way, shape, or form. And so how else do you survive? What? Yeah, neither do y'all. But and then for those of us who like to believe we do, we don't either, And then, but don't wreck it for me, please. but so this. But that is the ultimate case. But this makes it on this humongous cosmic scale for them to let them know that even though their world seems somewhat tenuous and rocky and shaky, that this God is still there and for them and with them. And that is ultimately why this type of, and remember, apocalyptic literature is just that. It is literature. I mean, this isn't like a 1-to-1 ratio. Oh, we're going to know because there's going to be fire in the sky or blood, and the moon's going to turn to blood. And none of those things. It is to get their attention to say there's something bigger going on in your world. Because let's face it. When we start having stuff go on in our lives, our world's become very small, right? I mean, we see our stuff. When we're having issues in our family, when we're having trouble or whatever, we tend, or at least let me put it this way, I tend not to see other people's stuff. I have to be kind of jarred to hey, there are other problems in the world. It's not just yours. And that's kind of what this does to them. Hey, I know you have a lot going on, but there's something bigger here for you. And that is hard for people, or at least it's hard for me to see, but then as a pastor, I go to the hospital and I sit with families and I go, yep, there's a lot of stuff going on out here that I'm not in control of, and that is big and scary, and it encapsulates their world, and they can't see, which rightfully so. They're taking care of immediate issues in their lives, so you get to see those kind of unknown, shaky things that happen in other people's lives really up close, and it kind of reminds you or me of things. So we have those moments. Anything else? Anything? Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, I think there's talking